But we want to now talk about real-world experiences that folks are having with crowdsourcing. So we have, from left to right, or your right to left, Dan Dubiner from ScaleHub. We have Dr. Timothy Rhodes from Merck, and of course we've got Dave from Topcoder. What I'd like to ask each of them to do is now Dave's a special case because there are many manifestations of crowdsourcing, so I'm going to ask him to think of one that's not similar to the two that he's going to hear before him, but we'll start down the line. Have each of you introduce yourself, talk about what you're doing with crowdsourcing, just so everybody gets a feel from a background perspective, and then talk about best practices, lessons learned as you've implemented what you've done, and how companies can take advantage of it. That makes sense. So we'll go ahead, Dan, start us off, please.
I'm Dan Dubiner. I'm one of the co-founders of ScaleHub, headquartered in Berlin. My accent is not from here, of course. We are providing crowdsource service as a managed service for enterprises, especially for BPOs, financial institutions, and insurance companies. We provide some solutions, for example, forms processing. We do forms processing using crowdsourcing. So that's a form solution. We do some solutions also for archive type of processing, but in general, the idea is providing crowdsourcing for the enterprise level to offer some scalability, of course, reduction of cost, offshoring, all the things that David, you mentioned, we having in our platform, but on a micro-task type of activities. So our solution is all around micro-task crowdsourcing. We have a distinction between private and public cloud. We have the same concepts, but when it comes to the public cloud, we're utilizing marketplaces where you can have users that anonymously logging into the marketplace and are willing to do some work for you. And when we're talking about work, we're talking about micro-task type of activities, annotation, field that they see and they transcribe the data, match some pictures to something. In fact, Amazon started Mturk many years ago because of their internal needs. If you take any item that you could find today on Amazon catalog, they need a lot of people to categorize and to provide names for that item, because it can be a nice glass for holding something, and it can be also something that someone else would think it is as completely different. Any item, we have imagination, and we can have different names and different descriptions for different items. So Amazon had this problem: how to create the best engine in the world, that every item that you're looking for, you will find it, you will always find it. They needed a lot of people, so they created all these micro tasks. And then at some point, they decided to open the API. And this is how Mturk and this whole concept of microtasking has developed using the Mturk concept. So we are utilizing the marketplace of Amazon. This is one of few marketplaces in the world of microtasking in order to do a lot of forms processing. In our company, we have different clients. We do every day tens of thousands of loans processing, federal tax forms processing, all using crowdsourcing. And the results, and one of the interesting things we have is that some of our customers used to process forms over 6 weeks, and now they get the results in less than 24 hours, and they get it super accurate and of course much cheaper. So this is amazing to see the power of the crowd. And they have a very short time in the year that they have a lot of forms to process, and all of a sudden they get it so fast in 24 hours. So this is amazing as a technology that we could leverage the scalability that we have using all the people that are logging in to the crowdsourcing. There are a lot of challenges. I think we can talk about the lesson learned and the different challenges. So of course, when you have anonymous users, you don't know who they are and how good they are, and whether they really want to work for you or they just want to spend their time and key some data and hopefully get some pennies back. And we had to develop over time a system that can learn the behavior and the pattern of the different users logging into the system, when they log, where they're logging from, and how they perform over time. And then we matched the users from the weak users to the strong users, and we do some sort of validation in order to guarantee the quality, because we have anonymous users. We can't have NDA and we can't really trust user X because we don't know who is user X. So we created certain technologies around the challenges to guarantee the quality and of course the SLA. SLA is a big topic. How can you guarantee SLA within a very competitive market? You're going to enter, there are a lot of tasks, a lot of users. Why someone would choose your task? So of course money talks, and you create some incentives, and then you get the people working for you. So you need a system that automatically prioritizes and change the pricing based on the amount of people that are available for that given time. These are the different challenges we had to create, and this is what we are doing. Guarantee that whenever you send us a form, you get it back in 24 hours in 99.5 accuracy rate.
All right, thanks, Dan. And that's, so I love the way we've got the panel structured by chance, because Dan just talked about the challenges and implementation of an anonymous public crowd. Now we're going to go 180 degrees in the opposite to an internal trusted crowd. So we'll have Tim talk about what you're doing.
180 degrees in like 7 different axes, if you can actually imagine that. So I'm a chemist. I could be, I couldn't be further from an occupational hazard from these two guys, except for the fact that I do a fair amount of coding sort of on the side as part of my day job. A couple of different angles. So I work at the interface of discovery, science and preclinical development at Merck. So discovering and developing new pharmaceutical drugs and translating them into products. Keytruda is one we're investing tons. Recently, I'm personally not directly involved in Keytruda, which I think we're running something like 500 plus clinical trials. It's just absolutely insane. Anyway, so I also I wear a couple different hats. One of those hats is sort of coming up with creative new solutions, new solutions to problems, or finding the people that have solutions to those problems. I've always been very passionate about doing that, and where that has landed me is I co-lead this team that is responsible for shepherding this incentive platform internally, which we have dubbed Solvit. And in the context of this conversation, what we're doing is essentially we're using their platform to post challenges that come from, historically they've been largely discovery science, discovery biology, and posting them on this site and seeing who else in the company might have some interesting ideas to offer some suggestions. And the intent is to engage the broad organization. The general philosophy is that in a company of 70,000 employees, it's statistically unlikely that there isn't at least one person that's a subject matter expert in pretty much any topic you want to ask a question about. It could be sewing, and we do nothing about sewing, but I guarantee you there are people that are expert sewers in their, on their weekend passions. And the advantage of that, and to be honest, we're still sort of working through how best to leverage this, but the advantage of that is the second I pick up the phone and call a vendor or an academic collaborator, there's this question of what can I reveal about our own internal knowledge, which could translate into billions and billions of dollars in revenue. And so there's this immediate, even if there is a confidentiality agreement, which often takes months to put in place. So my thought process is, you can pick up the phone and you say, Kurt happens to know something about drones, and we're having a conversation around how we can actually use drones to do maintenance of our facilities on site. but the guys that do facilities maintenance, that's just fundamentally not their area of expertise. And so we want to find the hobbyists that can maybe provide some quick, 5-minute conversation could save weeks of exploring the external landscape. And maybe at the end of the day, we still need to go out to an outside vendor to get the real expertise. But that 5-minute conversation can potentially steer us in a different direction. And so we put a lot of effort into how do we, it's sort of I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but I call it the Kevin Bacon game, is how do we the trick is always finding who that expert is the biggest challenge. And so the Solve It platform is intended to help enable that. We say, here's the challenge, and then a bunch of people self-select and they propose solutions, and sometimes the solutions are spot on and they lead to a technically sound solution that you can go after and solve a real tangible problem. The side benefit is I now have colleagues that I never knew before that I can go pick up the phone and have a conversation with and ping them on something else unrelated that I haven't even yet thought of. So where we're doing currently with this platform is where it started was in the discovery biology space, and a lot of the challenges that have been posted have been very, very science nerd, geeky kind of questions. And what we've struggled with is they attract a certain group of folks and the rest of everybody else is pretty much excluded. So we're trying to work with different divisions, finance, HR, MMD, manufacturing, all these different areas, and have them create challenges, IT, and sort of help to bring in a different audience that has a very different perspective. The other challenge, of course, is presenting the problems in a way that are sufficiently generic enough that just because the question is discovery biology doesn't mean somebody in finance doesn't see something that draws their attention and pulls them in. I'll stop there.
I'm curious, just before we move on, we talked earlier, I think Dave mentioned points, badges, even though there may not be a monetary award, but sometimes peer recognition is enough of a motivator, right, or status. Have you done anything like that in your work?
Yes, so we do. So it's relatively modest. So if you're in it for the money, it's probably not the best use of your time. And we haven't really figured out the right mechanism that really provides. So we're working on that. And honestly, I think the win is the post-solution engagement, right? We've now created a new community that has embraced this unique problem that's outside of maybe their comfort zone, outside of their department or division. And we haven't done this, by the way, terribly successfully yet. We're just sort of starting. But bringing that community together and then enhancing that conversation. It was all sort of virtual at the beginning. It was a bunch of blogging and electronic submissions and proposals, and we selected some winners. The next thing we're starting to do is, okay, let's bring these folks together and have a conversation, and these 3 different folks from entirely different areas that up until that point had never spoken to one another are now in a room, and actually one of the scientists said, why would I do that? They have such different ideas. And I said, well, I beg to differ. Your problem is the common theme here. That's what brought these groups together, and it'd be really interesting to see how we can pair these people with such diverse backgrounds to pony up to that problem. So we're still figuring out how to make this work at a large scale. It's very much a grassroots. It's supported highly, but we need some champions from a more diversified space to make sure that we're bringing in much broader perspectives to the problem.
Excellent. All right, Dave, I'm going to ask you to close us out. If there's, we've had kind of 2 ends of the spectrum. If there's anything we haven't talked about you want to riff on, just in terms of different models or implementations that you see in the marketplace, and what issues there might be or successes there might be.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, one thing I think Tim brought up that was really interesting when you said crafting the problem statement. I think that is kind of a science in of itself, right? I think that's where you'll find the platforms and things like that will help as well. Making it attractive so you don't just get the SMEs, but you get a wide range of thought. How do you attract the right people? I'm curious, I know it's open bar, so hearing me talk for a while is probably not as bad as normal, but I'll kind of turn it back to you guys a little bit. To me, I always think it's very interesting when I look at crowdsourcing, there's kind of two different approaches, right? Like, since we've been around for a while, we've helped build other platforms too. Like XPRIZE gives $1 million to tackle this huge solution. Tongle, I mentioned, I know breaks things up where they may have a screenwriter, a graphic designer, and they break it into small pieces and get it done. Microtasking does things in small pieces, or maybe that like Spigot gets a great idea, so you only have to focus on the idea. You don't have to worry about the solution. So I'm curious, in your experience, like what works, like how do you craft those, or what do you think about, like how do you get it out to the community, and what do you kind of expect from the community? I think is another interesting topic.
Want to go first? Okay. So we've got a couple of, like I said, some of the discovery biology ones. I will admit that they didn't really draw me in. It's not my area of expertise, and they were sort of initially off-putting. I also had a different conversation just earlier today around the fact that I have folks in my group that amongst their most trusted colleagues in a group of 10 in a room like this won't speak up. And now I expect them to post suggestions and challenges on a website that 4,000 people or more are going to actually see, and I can't get them to speak up in a room where it's sort of a circle of trust. So I'm still struggling with that. My gut reaction is there's not one solution to this problem. Some people are inherently going to participate in sort of this en masse problem, regardless of how you frame the problem. So I guess where I'm going, and maybe you're hearing in my answer to this, is that, I think there's a huge, at least in the space that I work anyway, there's a huge human equation to this. And I think the engagement, the personal engagement, actually is a big factor in the success. We ran a recent one. I'm not revealing a whole lot. It's an interesting story. I worked with IT folks to create this. They wanted to know how we can, so this gets into the data science and some of the AI. You mentioned AI before. An IT person partnered with somebody else to craft a challenge around how do we improve data stewardship. So anybody have a question what I mean by data stewardship? Basically, the person that generates the data has sufficient ownership of that data to provide appropriate tagging and metadata so that 6 months down the road, somebody they don't even know actually can leverage that information, and it's not their personal data, and they're using it for their immediate need. A data scientist down the road wants to pull data from 150 different projects and do something that they're not even aware they're doing. But given our challenges with people tagging their data correctly, that's a very important task today. So the IT person asked this question around data stewardship, and I worked with them to craft the question. We got some really colorful, positive, by the way, responses. But the responses were all around, essentially, if I were to paraphrase, our IT systems suck, and they had all these suggestions about how to improve IT. And none of them were about data stewardship, which was really a question of behavior. It wasn't a question of our IT tools. And so the IT person said, well, what are we going to do? We need to flesh this out and run it for longer. And I said, okay, I agree. We didn't get the answer you were looking for. They actually provided solutions to a different problem. And this is a group of folks that have self-selected to provide passionate solutions to a bigger IT partnering problem that we have. And I said, you just have a group of folks that just self-identified to help you solve that problem. So even though we didn't solve the problem of the question they asked, we may now have a broader community of folks that can actually, now we're not trying to generate revenue around solving this problem in a direct way that maybe you are. So it's fundamentally at the end of the day, it is affecting our bottom line operational efficiencies. But in the here and now, when people are asking this question, that's not necessarily what they're thinking about their personal pain. My personal pain is I can't find an experiment that my neighbor down the hall ran. If he were out that day, I have to be able to rely on being able to ask him. Right? Seems absurd in this day and age, but those are the kinds of things that people get frustrated about and get passionate about. Anyway, sorry.
So you have very good, actually, a question, Tim, actually everyone. What's the appropriate reward or award system? I mean, how do you say, here's a question, we hope to get an answer back, is it worth $20, $200, $200,000? How do you gauge that reward?
So I'm going to go ahead and chime in just because I kind of didn't quite answer that before, and I just realized that I kind of rambled off. So why the engagement? So to me, that engagement is sort of showing my input to this problem was valued. So I think that's where we've lost it in the past, and something that we're really putting a lot of effort is. The reward currently that we do is it's roughly about $500. We have a reward system, so it kind of translates into points internally, and you can pull your points from a lot of different things and use it for going online. And I think if you're very stingy with your points over time, you can like buy laptops and stuff like that. So it adds up over time. I think you probably know what I'm talking about. But any given reward, it's not right. I'm not looking at the reward and saying, "Oh, I want to participate in this because of the reward." Right? It's sort of where I think we struggle with is saying, I have the freedom, and I can actually provide valuable impact to help the organization move forward against this problem. And I think that's where we've struggled the most is helping people to see I can actually provide something valuable here and be recognized for that, because the dollar reward at the end of the day is not really pretty particularly profound. It's pocket. I mean, it's more than pocket change, but it's not a lot. So I don't think we're scaled to make it so large that everybody's just signing up and putting in anything.
Yeah, but the other extreme, right here, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, how do you balance? How do you balance that? I mean, what's the right number?
Personally, I think it's two different approaches, right? Like, I personally don't like the strategy of the hundreds of the $1 million Netflix prize is a good example of that. But they have great outcomes for that as well. The way we look at it is we try to do value-based. So whether it's so from a competitor standpoint, we actually optimize based on the number of submissions. So it's like, hey, we need an email service built, well-defined. We only want to get like 3 submissions. Competition drives quality, drives competitiveness, drives outcomes. So we price it and we say, okay, hey, this is maybe we holistically look at our platform, the amount of work going through. We say, okay, hey, this is Java, it's older technology, it's generic, it's public. Okay, we can price it based on what the price points are in the community, based on what we think the size is for that unit of work. If it's more on the idea and it might have more of an extreme outcome, we'll price it a lot higher because, something like the Pfizer example, the person may win $6,000. That might be worth actually millions of dollars to that company. So we try to base it on value and amount of work that might go into it, the difficulty of ramping up to participate in that challenge. So we provide pricing recommendations based on the data throughout our platform. The clients are always welcome to adjust pricing. We might just adjust our SLA based on that approach. I think when you look at the extreme outcomes, if you look at like an X Prize, their fulfillment rates are actually a lot lower as well, right? So they may hit some out of the park, but they may have some that don't actually vest. So in other words, like I think they had one was to get someone on Mars, right? That was one of their, where they were going to give, the first people that could come up with that approach was going to win $10 million. Or they had something, I think recently with Coca-Cola around developing, it was again, I think a $5 million prize around developing a sugar alternative or a corn syrup alternative. Even at that price.
Yeah, so it's hard to get you sure, but
Yeah.
do you think money drives better value, or?
I think you might get, the bigger problem is you probably get more people involved or teams or things of that nature. That might be a fun problem to tackle. I think, as a participant, you got to look at what that balance is and then what's your outcome. So like what Tim was saying, for us is we might have some winners and then they get invited into a smaller community, then they can contribute more. And that's a way to self-select and get people. Or they might be building a public profile, or they get expert review. So what's the value to me as a participant is that it's a fun experiment, I'm interacting with new people, I'm building a resume, and I gain experience. Is a great way to learn and maybe win some money. If you look at the large price purses, then you have to kind of do that risk. So personally, I feel the smaller one is better because you're not investing much time and it reduces your risk, and you still might get something out of it, even if it's not a monetary reward. I don't know.
I think we are very different in the way we are compensating our users. So when we are talking about crowdsourcing into microtasks, of course we expect a lot of people to participate. So a lot of them need to get money. Some of them, they come to Mtor, they expect to get something out of it, unlike some other ways where in other type of activities that there is sort of a competition that only one winner or second winner are getting compensated. In our type of activities, all users participate, expect to get compensated. And it depends, of course, on how fast they are and what type of tasks they get. So if I spread now, let's say 1 million fields that I need to transcribe, I want as much as possible users to come in. And if only one can get the money at the very end and it's only a few pennies, no one will come, of course. But if I give something, and I give it relatively easy if someone is just transcribing the correct data, I get a lot of users coming in. The question is, and this is come to your question, Kurt, is how to price it in this competitive market. Do I pay 1 cent per field, or do I pay 2 cents? Because at the end of the day, I need to make profit. The value I'm giving to the organization is reduction of costs by having sort of margins that I'm keeping, but managing the way that I save on the cost. And for us, the way to do it is simply to create some automated robots that spread the same piece, the same work units in different times to different areas and see where we get the best results over time by different users and learn the behavior and the patterns of the different territories. So we actually created different models to analyze what is the best pricing for the different tasks. And this is how we deal with that. Every time we just try, see what we get. We are happy we work with it. We're putting it in the robot. We get some analysis over time, and then we know how to price it.
So you're telling me that the market is almost setting the price for the work, which makes me, Dave, ask a question. When you talk about those programming superstars, and a couple of guys probably have certain, how do you keep people engaged, right? I can only imagine there's a core of people that are always number 2 or number 3 or number 4 and say, look, after 10 contests, I'm out because I'm putting all this effort, and the same guy keeps winning. How do you make sure that the talent pool and like a golf tournament? Hey, you came in 3rd, you get 10% of the prize. You came in 1st, you get 80%. Is there a scale?
Yeah, that's sort of how we do it. We usually pay 1st and 2nd. In design, we may pay down more. And as you earn your way in, you might get invited to other pools or review boards or things like that to make money. We try to optimize it so we don't have a ton of people in spots. But they also get gamification, they get points that can potentially turn into money and things of that nature as well. But we do try to make it market-based as well, so we recommend the prices to try to get to the right price point. I think the big difference is like the superstars. It's the best people do things in fractions of time, right? Like we did a unit of work for a consumer goods company that wanted to build an app that you could lens and see different contact color lens, right? And I'm sure you find any software developer that could probably write the algorithm to identify your iris and change the color. We put that out in, I think it was within 24 hours, we had 7 different algorithms that passed the test cases. That's probably because someone has that experience or done that similar piece, and they might have done something in the past. They gave them that algorithm in hours. Talking about a client, their original quote for their own development staff was 4 to 6 weeks just to do the algorithm. So, when you think of it that way, that maybe they only paid $1,000 for that, but that guy did that in an hour. And he may work on 20 other tasks, or he may have other work that he's working on to make that money. So we don't set really a time frame. So someone may spend 20 hours on it, or someone may spend 1 hour on it. They make their own value decisions based on that algorithm.
I think the other interesting thing too to remember is that these are global competitions, right? So $1,000 prize to someone in the U.S. might be just walking around money, maybe not worth a whole day's worth of work. But in India or some other economies, someone with equal talent, it's a month's wages perhaps, right?
Well, I think there's other aspects, so that, if you keep pricing it at $1,000, the superstar is essentially going to find better use of his time at some point and disappear from those things. At the same time, it also, I think it depends on the value and impact question, right? If the value is, you described an example, I think you both described an example where, to a large extent, there's a pretty large pool of people that could deliver. Maybe some are quicker, some are slower, but it's a supply and demand kind of a scenario. And the impact of getting to you're sort of guaranteed that you're going to get to a meaningful end game. And I think sometimes some of the things we're sort of throwing out there are a little bit more moonshot kind of a question marks. We don't, people have been bouncing this idea around for a decade, and we're not sure there's an answer. So we actually ran an external one recently through Incentive in their external platform, and the prize money for that one, this is public, so I can, I don't have to kill anybody after the prize, the potential prize money, we haven't actually completely made a decision yet, was $50,000, and they needed to build and deliver and prove that they could make a prototype to take samples sort of in an at-home setting from your GI tract for a microbiome project. Nobody has a good way to do this. And so there were some different creative proposals. None of them have quite completely hit the mark, so they're still kind of having some conversations about what they're going to do with respect to deciding on, who wins and actually what milestones they've actually achieved against that. The interesting, slightly different conundrum I had was interesting. So Merck employees cannot participate in this, in this particular way we have it crafted. And, in principle, I could throw my own ideas into the pool, but I already get a salary, so I'm not getting that $50,000. I might get a little. We give out coins for patents, so I might get a coin that I could
lunch pass.
I could hang on my head. I might get a lunch pass. I'm not even sure I get a lunch pass.
It might actually be a Bitcoin. I don't know. But no, I'll let the crowd think of their next potential question. But want to thank the speakers, the presenters here. But yeah, we struggled a lot when we started to stand up our own crowdsourcing at Merck. What is the right reward structure? We asked some people, it's like, hey, how about $200? Some people are like, $200? I'm not going to fill out the paperwork for $200. And other people are like, oh wow, $200! Like, I can't wait. So I think that's a big challenge of how do you reward it so that you attract the right attention to it. But and any last questions as we wrap up here?
Is there any kind of legal about the
Blaze, you have a
intellectual-
question?
I do. I get the intellectual property rights, right? If I come up with an algorithm that does something, do I own it? Do I relinquish my rights to the company that does it? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some point where you said, this is the $1 billion idea, and some guy said, hey, I crafted this idea as a freelancer, I got paid $1,000, and someone took it and turned it into $1 billion idea. I want a slice of that pie. I mean, has that been breached yet? Is there any, concern about that kind of thing, or that's part of the rules of the game?
Yes.
I'll sit down now because it's going to be an hour to answer that question.
Yeah, we haven't had, in 18
But any lawyers in the room? I mean, that's,
Yeah, knock on wood, in 18 years, we haven't had a problem. I think two things is, they do sign assignment of invention, all the kind of legal documents when they participate in challenges, and also when they receive the money prize. But because you, at least on our platform, you are given compensation for work, that is considered, like, in other words, if you give a free idea, it's very easy to go back and fight that. If you pay at least $1, then you can say that you were compensated for that intellectual property. We also use, for us, since it's software, we also...
That's where I get the dollar, but.
Yeah.
yeah,
We also
you-
use
I
like...
paid you, right? I paid you.
Yeah, we use like Black Duck and things like that. Different IP intellectual software units that go out and scan for like, was this code ever deployed at Microsoft,
Yeah,
open
like, yeah,
source, we have
Stolen from somebody else,
stock
right.
art scanners, so like if someone submit an image or a logo that might be someplace else, we do a lot of IP infringement automation around it as well.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, so I guess, let's just slightly different scenario, right? We go and we talk to, and Kurt, you're from the licensing area, or were at one point?
I have been at one point in my
Okay,
life.
at one point. So we go and we talk to these companies, or they come and talk to us. Some of these companies are sort of built around the premise that they eventually want to be acquired. They're sort of perpetual entrepreneur kind of a scenario. They want to basically spin it off. But anyway, we'll have these conversations, and we'll say, well, you just don't have enough for us. And we may say, well, okay, this is what we're willing to pay to acquire the licensure of this particular idea. Now, in this particular scenario, I would say, sort of cut and dried up front, if somebody feels like they have something that they could run with, then they probably, if they had the gumption to do it, and they really had that entrepreneurial spirit, they would go off and do it on their own, and then maybe come back to us with something more baked, fully baked, a year or 2 years down the road, something like that, and that's fine, because at the end of the day, we're still getting what we wanted. We're getting, this huge problem that nobody knew how to solve, and now it appears, okay, it's costing us a little more, but that's always a game, paying a little bit but getting in too early when the risk is huge, versus paying more later on when it's a more sure bet, right? That's the guys in the licensing department get paid the big bucks for those kinds of discussions.
We have much less of this problem, of course. When we do microtasking of transcribe the data, no one claims any AP on the data that they are transcribing.
So your legal group is much smaller.
Well, definitely want to thank the speakers tonight.